Hey guys, JK Wargames, and today we're going to do a review of Wing Leader Victories 1940 to 1942. Have to say a massive thanks to GMT Games for sending this to the channel for review. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so Wing Leader. How does the game work? So before we get into that, let's have a look at the map. This is the map and it represents the sky. It's blue. We have squares. And along the top we have letters, and down the sides and two in the middle we have numbers, and these are for setup. So it will say put your plane in M8 and you'd put the plane there, etc. Now the game works with these counters. So you can see here this is a squadron of Spitfires. Because the counter has two planes on, this means they're a squadron. If we had a single plane, like this BF-109, that means they are a flight. They are one plane. So when you get a squadron of bombers, like the Heinkel 111s here, they're a squadron because two planes are on the counter. So pretty simple. So what we're going to do is, we're going to run through how the game works, and then I'm going to sum up the game, my thoughts at the end of the video. Now when I first got this game out, I expected to be able to set it up and play quite easily, but I was wrong. This is quite a detailed game. At its core, it's easy, but there are a lot of small little details that you have to remember, but it adds a lot to the game. So what we'll do is, guys, I'll set up a tiny little scenario and we'll see how things work. So when we start a mission, if you are on an interceptor mission, you have to place a vector token. So each plane has a vector. So as you can see, the squadron of Spitfires is a D, and we have a vector for it, D. Now you can place this anywhere on the map. So over here we have a squadron of Heinkel 111s, we have an Escort, and we got a BF-109 on a sweep mission. Now this guy wants to place his vector above here, so he can do, and then the next guy would place his vector wherever he wants to. Now what this means is, when we get to movement, these planes have to fly towards their vectors. So each turn they have to climb at least one to be able to get to that vector. So they could climb one and then move forward. We'll look at movement in a minute. Now, when a vector is placed, the enemy can attempt to stop it being placed there. And they roll a d6 and they need a 6. So if they roll a 6, the enemy can pick up the vector placed and put it elsewhere and make things difficult for the RAF. So that's the first thing you do. So bombers, their mission is to just fly across the map and exit the map most of the time. Every scenario tells you different, but most scenarios for bombers are that they fly 2 squares each turn and they have to try and exit the map with their bomb loads. So these guys would just literally move 1, 2. Pretty simple. They have an Escort. Now the Escort can set up 3 squares within 3 squares of this squadron of bombers. And they fly 2 squares and they escort the bombers. But their mission can change and they can react to fighters trying to fight the bombers. So that's all done. We would then go into the tally phase. Now the tally phase is where planes attempt to tally other planes. So in each mission, one side are the raiders, the attackers, and one side are the defenders. The raiders always tally first. So let's say our Spitfires and Hurricanes are the raiders. They are attempting to tally. Now how this is done is how many squares away the target is. So this Spitfire here, this squadron, D, 1, 2, 3. The target is 3 away. Now they need to roll a 4 or higher because you have to get over the distance. So they'd roll a d6. They have rolled a 1. That would be a fail. They haven't tallied that target. Now if they did tally the target, they place a tally marker on them according to their plane. So they are D, so they would have a tally D marker put on them. So as soon as they have tallied, they would then grab their vector marker and flip the counter. On the other side is a tally. So they have tallied that BF 109. Now, what does this mean? So what this means is he can now engage in combat with this guy. But he still has to move into combat. But when a plane is tallied, when he does his movement, it triggers this guy's movement afterwards, straight away. So he jumps in front of anyone else. But movement is done in initiative order, which we'll look at in a second. So tallying is a big thing. So you're going to fly towards your vectors, and as soon as you tally, you're going to move that onto the target. But tallying is modified, and what we have are these play charts. So you can see here, this chart, tally roll. You have modifiers. So we won't go through them all, but you can see here, look, target is in a formation of 3 or more squadrons. Target is in a flak zone. Target affected by contrails. There's all sorts here. So you have to go through this list and modify. So there's a good chance you might not tally, and there's a good chance you could tally. So that is the tally phase. Now, movement. Let's look at movement. Movement is pretty simple. Squadrons, fighters, get 3 movement points. So these guys can move 3 squares. So let's put them there. They can go 1, 2, 3. They can climb or dive in 1 turn of movement. So if this guy wanted to climb, he'd have to angle up like this and then climb. But it's going to cost him a certain amount of points. And each aircraft in the game has a card. And you can see here, it says climb. And then you look at that altitude. So he's at 4 to 12. He's in between 4 and 12. It's going to cost him 2 movement points to climb. So it will cost him 2 movement points to move up into that square. He has 1 more movement point, so he can move 1 more into that square. That's 3 movement points. But if you climb, your plane gains one of these. A climb, -1 speed. And that goes on the plane, like so. When we get round to the next turn of movement, this guy has a -1 speed. So if he climbs again, remember it cost him 2 at this altitude, he's going to go 1, 2 to climb. He won't be able to go forward this time because his speed is reduced, -1. If you don't climb in a turn, you still are reduced, so he only has 2 movement points, 1, 2, but because he didn't climb, that climb marker now comes off. Now, let's say he dived in a turn. So he's going to angle like this, and to dive, go lower, only costs 1 point. And you gain a +1 speed. I can get that in focus. A +1 speed dive marker. So if you dive, you can actually gain 4 movement points. So 1 for moving, 2, 3, 4. Because he gains that dive marker straight away and he gains a +1 speed. And again, next time round, if he didn't dive, this marker would come off. So movement's pretty simple. Now, if we had a target here and we had him tallied, if you're above the target like this, you can turn your aircraft like this and then come into the same box to perform combat. You can come in from here, head on, you can come in from the tail, underneath, whatever you want to do. So that's the basics of movement. And remember we said about bombers, they just move 2. So what about combat? So combat is an interesting one. So let's say Squadron D have tallied the BF 109 here. We get round to movement and, oh, I forgot to say, initiative for movement is dogfights move first, then escorts, then bombers, then unalerted fighters. We'll talk about alerted and unalerted in a minute, and then alerted fighters. But let's just show combat. So this guy, it's his movement. He has 3 movement points. He goes 1, 2, 3. Now, because he's got this guy tallied, they're in the same box. This is a combat. So when we get to the combat phase, they can perform a combat. So how do we work out combat? Again, you're going to use your card. And as the attacker, because you attacked, you are the attacker. The plane that's being attacked is the defender. Pretty simple. You can choose what speed you want to attack with. So you can either use speed 5 or you can use your turn of 6. Now if you use your turn, the defender gets a modifier. They get to increase by 2 on their modifier. So it's best to use speed, and a turn is always used in a dogfight, which we'll look at in a minute. So we're going to choose to use 5. So the attacker has 5. So there's 5. Put that there. Now the defender has his card, BF 109. We can see his speed is a 5. So he has to match. So if the Spitfire uses speed, he has to use speed. If the Spitfire uses turn, he has to use turn. So they're both on 5. This is then modified. And we get our lovely little chart. So you can see modifiers. Marked with bomb load, no. None of that applies. Marked with a dive marker, no. Marked with climb or slow marker, no. Modifiers. Each additional fighter squadron, no. Squadron is veteran, none of that applies. Now, if we were a single aircraft, unit is a flight, not a squadron, we'd have a -1. Squadron is disrupted or broken. No, we haven't got that far yet. So this is no modifiers. So because they're 5 and 5, it would be a 0. Now, if there was a difference, like this, the attacker has 5 and the defender has 4, that's a +1. So the attacker would attack on +1 and the defender would attack on the -1. But for our example, we have a 0. So quite simply, the Spitfire rolls 2d6 and he's rolled a 7. So we look at our chart. On a 7, on 0, we score 1 hit. But we have modifiers. So head-on combat is a -2, and it is a head-on combat because we came head-on. So we're down to a 5. There's no other modifiers that apply. So a 5 is no effect. There'd be no hits. But let's say we did get that 1 hit. What do we do then? Well, quite simply, we have to see what the effect of the hit is. So we know the BF 109, its protection is 4. Okay, so we roll 1 dice. We roll a 3. You add your firepower. So as the attacker, the Spitfire adds a 1. His firepower is a 1. We have to try and equal or beat that. So we've equaled 3 plus 1 equals their protection of 4. That means a straggler result. And they gain a straggler token. If we can get this to focus, they gain a straggler token like this. Now, if we beat their protection is 4. If we beat it, we cause a loss like this. And then this is put onto the wing display, and that's what we're going to look at next. Okay, so this is the wing display. Now, this is how we track our losses, whether our flight is broken or disrupted, etc. So you can see here at the top, we have the ID marker for our Spitfires, and it's a D, and they are alerted. The interceptors always start alerted. Over this side, the sweep mission is unalerted. They're always unalerted. But after they've been in a combat, they will be alerted. And if they're on a radio comms, any other squadrons in the sweep will be alerted as well. Now, from that example, we caused a loss on the Messerschmitt. So there's the loss counter. So that goes on their flight like that, and on their wing display, sorry. And in the scenarios, it will tell you how many losses a squadron or a flight can take before they are out of the game. Now, the other thing we'll have a look at in a minute is whether a squadron or flight is disrupted or broken. So basically everything goes on this little wing display, and you can keep track of what's happened to your aircraft. So this is a really nice little neat idea. Now the other thing is you can get these experter, I think I've said that right, and these add modifiers. These are like veterans. Well, kind of. If in the scenario it says a veteran, you're going to place that on there. Now, veteran is very powerful in this game. It applies to a lot of the modifiers in combat and tallying, etc. So let's go back to the board, and I'll show you what happens after we've performed the combat. So the Spitfire caused a loss on the BF-109. The BF-109 would then attack back, so they would roll their 2d6. They've scored a 7, and they get modifiers, so they have a different chart to look at. So you can see here, defender die roll modifiers. It was a head-on combat, so they have a -2 as well, so they are down to a 5, exactly like what happened with the Spitfire, but just for the example, we ignored it. So they would go through that. They would then roll to see if they cause a straggler or a loss result. Now, after both sides have attacked each other, we have to roll cohesion. So the Spitfire rolls 2d6 for their cohesion. Now he's rolled a 3, 4, 5. And then we look at the cohesion table, which is here. So you can see we have modifiers. So at the moment, we've rolled a 5. And a 5 would mean, for a fighter, we have 1. But we go over and look at this. Total of the squadron's loss markers. Well, the Spitfire doesn't have any. None of these apply. So he has a 1 on a 5. Now, a 1 for a fighter means they are disrupted. So their squadron becomes disrupted. That goes on the wing display that I just showed you. Now, if they have a result of 2, they go straight to broken, and that would go on their wing display. When a squadron is broken, they are effectively out of the game. They have to fly back to base, but if your opponent can stop you from doing that. So if you say, I want to get these guys back to base, they're broken, your opponent can say, no, I don't want you to do that, and then you will make a dice roll to see whether it happens or not. Now, the reason your opponent wouldn't want that to happen is because they want to cause more losses, because most of the victory points come from causing losses. So it's quite an important thing. Now, the Messerschmitt, BF109, would roll his cohesion. He's rolled 4. He would look at his modifiers. He gets a 1, so they're disrupted as well. So after every round of combat, you're going to go to cohesion. So pretty simple. Now, remember what I said about a squadron can take a certain amount of losses. So once a squadron has taken that amount of losses, that counter would be broken or out of the game. So pretty simple. You're going to tally your enemy, you're going to engage in combat, you're going to roll combat, and then you're going to roll cohesion. So let's just show another little example here. These bombers are flying here, 3 in a row, and we have an escort here. Now this Spitfire has 3 movement points, and he has this guy tallied. So he has this bomber tallied. So we go 1, 2, 3 is going to take us into the square with the bomber to attack him. But because this is an escort, he can attempt to react to what we're doing. So he says, no, I'm going to react. So the Spitfire has to stop. And the BF109 will roll on the reaction table. So the reaction table, if I can find it. So escort reaction, you roll a 2d6 roll. So he's reacting, rolls his dice, he's rolled a 2, double ones. So we look here, 2 to 5 is a late reaction. And what a late reaction means is that this Spitfire can still fly in here to attack the bomber, but the escort gets to fly in as well. But the Spitfire will be the attacker against the BF109 and the Heinkel. Now, if he was successful on his reaction, the Spitfire would not be able to enter where the bomber is, and the escort jumps on him in his square, and the BF109, the escort, is now the attacker and the Spitfire is the defender. Now, when this happens, the sweep mission, the escorts change their mission to sweep on their wing display. Now that's important because a sweep will react differently to an escort. So that's the basics. There's a lot more to it. There are flights that have radios, there's sun, so the position of the sun, you have to work out whether you're attacking or defending from the sun, but this video would be probably an hour long, which I don't want it to be. So that's just a very quick look at how the game works. So what are my thoughts on the game? I think this is a great World War II combat game. There are hundreds and hundreds of aircraft in this game. It's not just Spitfires and Hurricanes. There are Chinese, Japanese, everything you could think of. I wouldn't advise this game for a beginner because there is a lot to it. There's quite a few charts you have to go. You're looking at all the modifiers. So this is kind of in the medium bracket. I've been playing it solo and it works fantastic. The game is designed for 2 players, but I've seen online as well, a lot of people seem to enjoy it more solo. So I enjoy that solo aspect of playing it. I'm almost tempted to say that this could be my new favourite from GMT games. I just love air combat games. They're just great, and I feel this game captures that sort of tension of fighters diving on each other and bombers trying to make it to their mission. And there's a lot of scenarios in the game. I won't go through them, but in this book there are, God, there's loads of scenarios. There's tons, and they're all different. So there's 30 scenarios. There's 30 scenarios. That's more than enough to play through. So fantastic game from GMT. The last thing I would say is you get this battle display. Now this isn't something I really use. So when there is a combat, instead of having counters, if there's a lot of counters in one square, you can place them on here instead of there. So you place a battle marker here and place the guys there, so it's just easier for you to do. The other thing I didn't touch on is after combat, if no one is broken or disrupted, you check to see if a dogfight occurs, but that's a whole nother video. So I hope you've enjoyed this review, guys. This has been Wing Leader Victories 1940 to 1942 by GMT Games. I hope you liked it. Make sure to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.